The numbers tick up. We did get some feedback that during the day sessions might be preferable to end of day afternoons. So that's why we made this shift. I guarantee you will give us feedback if you like this change. So please continue to let us know. But for our final SY26 webinar, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to walk through a set of topics, and thank you to all of you and your representative coalitions for giving us some thoughts on what you wanted to hear. I'm going to go to the next slide. I'll just quickly walk through what the agenda looks like for today. So we're going to start with an overview coming out of the Statewide Graduation Council and give you a sense of where the council is wrapping up its work and what the graduation standards framework recommendations coming out of that council are. We're going to do an overview of the new family portal. We are going to share additional resources around the timeout guidance, 2 reminders of previous items, one around immigration guidance related to the governor's executive order, and then some reminders of the MassLeads Act, and then some requests to talk about upcoming regulations around interpretation and translation. So we'll give a quick preview of where those are. And then as always, we'll end with Q&A. So throughout the presentation, feel free to use the Q&A function to drop in any questions that you have for us. Anything we can't get to just live in the meeting, we will follow up with you directly afterwards for sure. So please don't be shy with dropping in those questions. But with that overview, I will turn it over to our commissioner.
Thank you, Lauren. And again, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I remember, just from being a superintendent, in one respect, this was one of my favorite times of the year. I know we're just finishing up graduation season, a lot of celebrations, a lot of excitement across our graduations across the state. I also know around this time also, people are tired. I'm always very sensitive for our classroom staff, especially our teachers and paraprofessionals, our school leaders. Again, this time of the year, you get kind of tired because you're getting really close to the end. We're sort of in the 9th inning of the game, right? And so, and at the same time, I know leaders, you just had, again, some very challenging budgets this year. And so I just want to call that out and acknowledge that. I know there's a lot of hard work. So I want to thank you for your leadership, and as you're closing out the year, and I know you're already planning for next year. So first, I want to just thank you for your leadership. As Lauren, has taken us through the agenda, several important points, both in terms of hopefully final recommendations for our grad standards, as well as reg reminders, as well as upcoming regs. So just a couple of things really quickly, leaders. One is, first of all, I'm just finishing up my first year, first time again in a state role, first time living in Massachusetts. And I have just loved just visiting our districts. I've been to over 80 towns and districts since the school year started. And, I'll tell you, I've always felt very welcome. So I want to just first thank you and know that we're going to continue that into next year. So I just want to thank all of you just for making me feel welcome. I've also gotten a chance to interact with our leaders in multiple different forums, superintendents and deputy superintendents. And so again, I just want to just humbly just say thank you, and just feel so honored to serve as a commissioner in today's times. One of the things I'm going to ask of you, especially as you listen to the graduation standards, and you'll get a really good briefing. We're hoping that the finalized report will be coming out this month. I want you to separate a couple of things. So one is, I've always said this, what you're going to see in our grad standards is a statement of values as educators of what we believe is necessary for our children. What is necessary to make sure our children can take advantage of all the amazing opportunities, and I see them, the amazing opportunities that our Commonwealth has to offer, whether it's our higher ed, our many industries, the wonderful trades that exist. And so this is really a reflection of those values. And I just need your support to lift up those values. I think it's important for our communities and our parents at this time for us to stand together. We're going through this transition, as we're, again, developing these new grad standards. And I want you to know that we are committed here in the agency. We are committed to really working with you on how we implement them, how we make sure you're successful in implementation, including making sure you have the necessary resources So again, just know you have the commitment, and it's okay to, again, there's a lot of details, and it's okay to be skeptical about some of the details. So, but I want us to lift up at least both the values that are behind these standards, the overall recommendations, and what it's going to mean for our children. And then separately, let's work together to make sure you have all the necessary support and resources so that we can implement them well. So that's all I ask. But you're gonna hear from our two amazing deputy commissioners, Rob Curtin and Lauren Wu. So please, again, please receive this in that spirit. And again, look forward to continuing to work with you. Rob?
Great. Thank you, Commissioner. Good afternoon to everybody. Good to be with you all again. So I'm going to lead you through the first three topics here. And the first one that we're going to start with are the recommendations related to new graduation standards. I think many of you, if not all of you, are aware that an interim report came out in December that had initial recommendations in there. And we're now, in accordance with the executive order from the governor, getting ready to release the final recommendations. Just want to caveat this with, we think we're right at the finish line, but nothing is final until it's final. But it was important to us that while many of you have joined us on this journey and have participated at various points, and I'll go over that in a second, we wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to speak with you as a group so that you're all hearing them. I'm sure it's not the first time for most of you, but we wanted to make sure that everybody had an opportunity. So coming off of the initial report, we went on a major sort of stakeholder engagement tour. And you'll see a listing here, and very much involved our educational leaders across the state, whether that be part of a survey that we did for our district leaders, whether that be part of a advisory groups that we had that had over 20 meetings. And one of those advisory groups was an LEA leader specific advisory group. Thank you to those that served on that. We really appreciate your time there. And this was all in service and sort of all around the 14 statewide graduation council meetings that happened from starting last year all the way through up through last month. And those included a representative from MASS as well. So thank you to everybody that has engaged with us throughout this journey. We're really appreciative, and we think we've ended up in a place, as the commissioner said, that is really reflective of our values. And I'm happy today to walk through with you where we are with the recommendations. So when we think about the recommendations, there are four primary components to them. And you'll see them listed there. Foundational coursework is the first one. And the recommendation that's coming out of there is that all students will complete MassCore. Many of you are familiar with MassCore. We're going to talk a little bit about where you are in your MassCore implementation and your required use of MassCore. But I think everyone's aware MassCore is a rigorous program of study. And a really big piece of key point here is that it aligns with admission requirements for higher education and opens up post-secondary options for all students. So at the core recommendation here is this foundational coursework where all students will complete MassCore. And the second one here, and I'm sure you've heard a lot about this, is around end of course assessments. So in addition to completing the coursework, students will complete end of course assessments in specified MassCore subjects, okay? These end of course assessments will be designed, administered, and scored by the state. And we bolded here for you some key language because there's a lot of work still to be done here and a lot of decisions to be made. So I want to draw your attention in the end of course assessments to that we have said, and this is the language from the report, performance on the end of course assessments will meaningfully count towards students' academic record and their path to graduation. Okay, so there's a lot of decisions to be made. We do mention in the report potentially accounting for a percentage of the grade for the student in a particular course. But there's decisions to be made here, and those will be made in concert with you based on your feedback as we move towards implementation. I do want to note on the end of course assessments in terms of how many and what courses are we talking about. The commissioner has very much talked about these being at the beginning of a high school career. So you could imagine, and this is the report is going to say, that we'd be looking at perhaps one in each of ELA, math and science, and potentially history. So we're not talking about an end of course assessment in every subject that required a Mass Core. This is really to look at the beginning of a student's high school career in some foundational courses in ELA, math, science, and maybe history to determine the student's readiness to move on to more advanced coursework, okay? So we're looking at a minimum of 3, potentially 4 end of course assessments that would generally be taken at the beginning of a high school, at the beginning of the high school career of the student. The third primary component is around post-secondary planning. And really the big takeaway here is that all students will have a post-secondary plan. We know that a lot of students are using or have post-secondary plans now, but a core requirement of the coming out of this report is that all students will have a post-secondary plan. And that post-secondary plan will be defined by the state's MyCap framework. That MyCap framework will include a series of year-by-year milestones that students will be required to meet. These required milestones will include financial literacy, artificial intelligence and digital literacy, work-based learning, and knowledge about the FAFSA and MASFA to either complete or opt out of that requirement. You'll see that artificial intelligence and digital literacy is bolded or in red as well. The reason for that is because this represents something new since the initial report. We heard a lot of feedback as it relates to AI and digital literacy, and the final recommendations will likely include this to be a required milestone as part of the MyCap framework. So the third one, again, all students will have a post-secondary plan that sets them up for future success. And then the last component is what we're calling a culminating experience. All students will complete a culminating experience, which will either be a capstone project or portfolio of work. This will be based upon a state-defined rubric that districts will implement and that students must be able to demonstrate their mastery through a culminating experience. The capstone or portfolio will be assessed locally, but will be based upon a state-developed rubric. Okay, and if you think about this, and I've heard the commissioner talk about it this way, if you think about the end of course assessments and the culminating experiences together, they serve as a nice bookend, right? So that the end of course assessments are at the beginning of a high school career to signal readiness for more advanced coursework as the students progress through the Mass Core curriculum. Whereas the culminating experiences are at the end of the high school career to demonstrate the comprehensive nature of the learning that's occurred over the course of the high school career, either through a capstone project or portfolio work. So these are the 4 primary components that will be in the recommendations in the final report. And as I mentioned, within those, there are a series of embedded components. And I just mentioned a few of these, but there are 5 of them listed here. The first one is around financial literacy. As the commissioner has talked about often, this is something we heard very often through our stakeholder engagement, whether it be through surveys, whether it be through meetings in public meetings or advisory groups, was the need for students to be able to develop financial literacy. And this will be a required MyCap milestone, one of the milestones that I talked about on the previous slide. And also students may further demonstrate advanced knowledge and skills through a culminating experience or a potential seal of distinction. And we'll talk about seals in a second. But financial literacy will be one of the embedded components you'll see in the recommendations within the MyCap framework. Another one will be work-based learning. And students will engage in a work-based learning experience through a required MyCap milestone. These experiences will support career exploration and preparation. And again, this is also something that they might be able to demonstrate through a culminating experience and or a potential seal of distinction at the end of their high school career. As I mentioned, we will require students to have knowledge about the FAFSA or the MASFA as a required MyCap milestone. The requirement will be on the district to provide exposure to students as it relates to filling out the FAFSA or the MASPA. And then students will have the opportunity to then either complete it or choose to opt out, but the requirement will be on the district to provide exposure to either the FAFSA or the MASPA. The fourth one here is a new one. Again, artificial intelligence and digital literacy, again, will be a required MyCap milestone. And these competencies will be integrated across the framework through MassCore coursework, relevant culminating experiences, and again, offer the opportunity for a potential seal of distinction for students. And then the last embedded component is that students will develop civic knowledge either through coursework or applied learning experiences. And again, this will require further definition, and we're committed to this work and working with you to further develop not only this one, but all of them. But these 5 embedded components will be part of the graduation requirements, and students will be required to demonstrate as a graduation requirement once these are fully implemented. I mentioned seals, and you're going to see in the report that the state will be committing to developing and defining a list of seals of distinction, okay, state seals of distinction. And the requirement will be that districts will offer a minimum number of these state designated seals that all students will have access to attain. Again, this falls into the category of decisions to be made around what that minimum number will be, what that final list will be. But the criteria and the parameters for issuing those seals will be determined by the state, and districts will be required to offer a minimum number. And there's a lot of work, again, to be done here. But this, again, is putting a stake in the ground around a requirement that districts will be required to offer students the opportunity to attain a minimum number of state seals of distinction. So let's talk a little bit about the implementation timeline here. The recommended timeline for the MassCore requirement, remember, if I can take you back to the first slide around the primary components. The first one was around MassCore. The recommended timeline in the report for the MassCore requirement to take effect is for the incoming 9th grade cohort in the fall of 2027. Those are our current 7th graders, okay? Now, I know that might be a little jarring to hear, but I am going to take, in a minute, I will talk a little bit more in depth about district readiness to take on that requirement. So again, for the MassCore requirement only, we are proposing, the report will recommend that that MassCore requirement go into effect for the 9th grade class in the fall of 2027. The recommended timeline for the remaining requirements to take effect is for the incoming 9th grade cohort in the fall of 2028. So those are our current 6th graders. So let's talk about the MassCore implementation requirement. As you may remember, we collected all of your local graduation requirements from you for the year 25-26, the current school year, okay? And we went through each of those local graduation requirements as you submitted them to us, okay? And based on that reported data, right, the headline here is that 70% of our high schools across the Commonwealth are either currently requiring MassCore or one subject away from requiring MassCore. And to add a little bit of depth to that, so when I say they're one subject away, that might mean that a school requires 3 years of math instead of 4 years of math. So they're just not meeting it in one subject, okay? But the takeaway here is that 70% of our districts and 70% of our schools out there are either requiring MassCore already or really, really close to being able to in terms of the MassCore requirement. Additionally, if we look at the data from on the student side, The data that you have provided to us tells us that 82% of Massachusetts graduates already meet the Mass Core requirements. So that suggests to us that while Mass Core may not be required at scale, most schools are already making the program of study available, and most students are already completing it. So when we thought about the timeline in terms of implementing Mass Core and as a graduation requirement, we were swayed by the fact that, first, most of our schools, 70% of our schools, are either implementing already or really close to implementing, and that most of our students are already meeting the requirements. And that tells us that schools are close to being able to make the program of study available to all students, since most students are already completing it. In addition, when we think about the implementation of the Mass Core, okay, and again, I understand that the incoming seventh grade, this year's seventh graders are close to high school, but this is not a requirement, a new requirement that's going to cause specific action as it relates to the fall of 2027. That's because our current regulations that are already in place, that districts are already required to follow as a result of the regulations we put in place following question 2. Those regulations already require 2 years of ELA, 2 years of math, 1 year of science, and 1 year of history. So this largely covers the students' first 2 years of high school and the Mass Core requirements. The incremental requirements, in other words, the additional years of math, the additional year of science, history, world language, arts, largely don't come into play until students are in 11th and 12th grade. What this means is, although the requirements will be going into place for this year's 7th grade class, the implementation timeline and the existing regulations that are already in place give districts that need to add requirements a longer runway to actually implement them. So we're actually talking about the additional requirements impacting districts for 3, 4, 5 years from now. In terms of our next step, as the commissioner mentioned, we are expecting the final report to be released this month. We will communicate to you when that report is going to be released so that you are aware of that it will be coming out. Most importantly, we are, as the commissioner said, committed to providing guidance and assistance to in the coming year to support districts in meeting Mass Core. We know that that's the first requirement coming in. And as I said, if we have 70% of our schools that are really close, we're obviously going to devote our attention to the other 30%, right? And in that other 30%, we know that 20% are pretty close, even though they might not just be one subject away, while 10% of our schools are further away. We've gone through each school's graduation requirements to do this. So we know exactly where we need to devote our attention. We know exactly which schools we need to work with that are furthest away from being implement the requirement. And we're committed to, in that order of need, to providing the guidance and assistance that is needed in helping districts to be able to get there, while also acknowledging that it's not a requirement, that the requirement might not, or the need for additional resources, staff, what have you, might not be needed until the student's 11th and 12th grade year. We're committed in the 27 school year to helping you work through this and plan for it. We also will continue to encourage innovation and flexibility in course offerings, so that you be able to satisfy the requirements of Mass Core. We listed an example here, counting engineering as a math unit, right? So we will begin that work immediately to think about what types of courses do we want to be able to meet certain requirements. But again, we stand ready to be able to work with you, and we know the districts specifically that we need to work with, and are committed to doing that work over the next year. That was the end of my slides on the graduation requirements. Commissioner, I just wanted to give you an opportunity if there's anything you wanted to add, or add anything I might have forgotten to say.
No, I think, Rob, I think, right now I'm just looking at the questions we have and we're trying to answer them as fast as we can. But the main takeaway I want you to take, everyone, is that, um, on many of these requirements, we have evidence of work across the Commonwealth, and a lot of good practices that we want to lift up. And as Rob said, the Mass Core is the one that, there's a more urgency on, but we're very, our schools are very close on this. And the good thing about Mass Core is there's a lot of flexibility that is being exercised today, and that will continue to be exercised. And so again, everybody know that, again, we're going to do this with you. Thank you, Rob.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner. Okay, I'd like to transition to talk briefly about the MCAS Family Portal. Before I dive into some of the exact details here, I want to give you a little bit of the thinking behind our decision to release the MCAS Family Portal, and at the time we're doing so. I think over the course of my time here at the agency, one of the, we'll call it, constructive criticisms of the MCAS program has been the timeliness of results getting back to parents. And I, over time, could understand that criticism. And one of the reasons that we were releasing the data at the time we have been releasing it for many years is because of the data were preliminary, right? And we had a discrepancy period. And we wanted to make sure that we were providing the most accurate information possible. Well, over time, the number of discrepancies that we have been getting has decreased significantly. And we have gotten to the point where we feel comfortable releasing student information to families on a rolling basis. Those discrepancies that we've been getting are now in the hundreds as compared to the hundreds of thousands of tests that we administer every year. And I want to be clear that I understand that the first time that we do this there's never a perfect time to do it for the first time. But we strongly believe that it's a benefit to families to provide them with results of their students when we feel comfortable being able to do so. And we feel we've piloted the portal, the family portal, this spring with a few districts. Thank you to those districts that helped us. And we feel comfortable moving forward. Unfortunately, we cannot do this ourselves, okay? We can't communicate with districts, with parents directly. So we need your assistance to do it. And so that's the reasoning behind what we're doing. But the portal itself will give families secure online access to their results earlier than they ever have. The results for this year's MCAS and MCAS Alt are expected, as you see on the screen here, to be released this month, starting with ELA in June. We are going to do this in phases. In August, we're going to do the remaining subjects, math, science, and civics. And then in September, we will do the official results in the portal again, and that will include school, district, and state level results. So the initial results that your parents see will only be for their students, okay? And we will eventually add school, district, and statewide comparisons for them to be able to see. But we cannot make that data available right now. Frankly, we don't have it calculated yet. So we are just making data available to families on a rolling basis in an attempt to get their results to them as soon as we possibly can. I thank you in advance for your efforts around this. I understand it's a busy time of year, but there would be no great time to do this for the first time. And we are thankful for the efforts that you're going to give us for something that we think is really beneficial to families. A little bit more about the portal. It is desktop and mobile enabled. There is a Spanish translation available within the portal, though users can toggle back and forth between the English and the Spanish versions. A letter from the commissioner to families, a quick start guide, and a longer, more detailed guide will also be available, and those will be translated into more than a dozen languages. All of these resources will be available and are available on DESE's website. When you have these slides, that's a live link that you'll be able to go to be able to access those resources. What's going to happen in order, and this is where your help comes in, we are going to provide to you one-time registration codes that you will need to disseminate to your families. Once families sign up using that code, they can then log in anytime to view the results as they become available this year and in future years. We will be holding a webinar tomorrow for district test coordinators, school test coordinators, and principals to provide details on how to access and distribute the codes. Registration has been strong for that already, so thank you in advance for your time there as well. So again, thank you for your efforts around this. I forgot to mention that in addition to current year's results, we are also loading 3 years of past results for families to be able to go back and look at so they can see how their students have progressed. We think this is beneficial for the families, but and thankful for the lift that on your part to be able to help us to get there. Okay, my last bit of business here is around timeout and seclusion regulations. The regulations around timeout and seclusion will be going into effect on August 17th of this year. These regulations were passed last spring. They were actually in June of last year. So districts have had over a year to be able to get ready for the implementation of these regulations. And why have we done this? This has been a long time coming. We've taken a phased approach around reducing the use of restrictive practices and strengthening behavioral supports for students, including along the way regulations around the use of restraint. But this all has come out of a long period of time that included guidance from USED, enforcement activities, frankly, from the U.S. Department of Justice. We've talked to a lot of stakeholders, and we've talked to a lot of districts through their monitoring and thinking about how they were using timeout and seclusion. And of course, it's to do with any regulation. We went through a public feedback process as well. As I mentioned, these regulations are coming into effect this August 17th, 2026. There's a graphic here that I won't go through, obviously, in great detail with you, but I would encourage you to look at once we mail out these slides, because this shows you the timeline here. This goes all the way back to 2016 and details some of the things that we've done, including stakeholder engagement, including releasing a grant last year of almost $4 million across the state to help districts think about the implementation here. But we are moving towards the implementation of these regulations this coming August. What changed? There were the definitions of seclusion and timeout were changed. We added requirements around the physical nature of any room that's used for seclusion. There was regulatory language around emergency circumstances under which emergency seclusion may be used, and then included in the regulation some safeguards around the use of emergency seclusion as well. Again, this is another area where these are live links. There's a guidance document. There's a policy memo. We've also included links to the regulations themselves when you get these slides for you to be able to look at. We know many of you take your guidance directly from the regulations in addition to the guidance documents that we put out. And also we have more resources coming out. We have an FAQ that will be coming out. We have some asynchronous professional development modules that will be available to you. There are new reporting requirements in the regulations, so we will be offering training around those reporting requirements and how you're going to report seclusions. Those are required to be reported to us. In addition, additional monitoring criteria that will for LEAs as a result of these regulations as well. So all of those things will be coming out to help you in addition to the guidance and policy memo that we've already released back in February. as we get closer to the implementation date here. Okay, those were my 3 sections. Oh, sorry, I have one more slide. My apologies. So what can you do in terms of getting ready for these regulations? Make sure that you've reviewed your policies and procedures. Assess your spaces to make sure that they are aligned with the regulations. We've encouraged districts to look at their data in terms of the frequency, the use of seclusion, who's being secluded, and timeout, use of timeout as well. Determine how you're going to use your, determine how you're going to offer training and professional development within your districts. And then there are notification requirements related to the use of seclusion, how you're going to track the uses of timeout and seclusion within your districts, and including your updating your data forms and processes and how you're going to report things to us as well. So, and we stand ready to assist you in this. Tomorrow, there's also a call with our special ed directors in which we're going to talk about a lot of these things as well, and in order to assist you in preparing for the implementation of these regs as well. So now that really is the end of my 3 sections, and I'm going to turn it over to Lauren to first start to talk about our immigration guidance.
Great, thanks, Rob. So I just want to first begin by thanking you and everyone on the call for your continued work to make your schools welcoming and safe spaces for every student, regardless of background or immigration status. To support in those efforts, on January 29th, 2026, Governor Healy issued Executive Order 650, protecting access to essential services and keeping Massachusetts communities safe. This executive order directed the Executive Office of Education, EOE, to develop guidance for the development of policies and procedures related to staff interacting with federal immigration officers and requiring a judicial warrant or judicial order for entry into non-public areas. At the end of May, and as linked on this slide when you do receive these slides, the Executive Office of Education issued the guidance as a framework for schools and districts to develop or update their own policies or procedures. You can reach out to the Commissioner's office if you need additional support, and we are at the ready to support you in whatever way we can. Next slide, please. Great. So next is a brief overview of some of the requirements related to the K-12 initiatives as part of the Massachusetts Economic Development Law, the MassLeads Act. As many of you know, the MassLeads Act was signed into law by Governor Healy in 2024. Among other things, there were key provisions added related to K-12 initiatives, such as research and evaluation on educator diversity, retention, and effectiveness, educator preparation and licensure initiatives, such as the Alternative Pathways to Licensure, which was just regulated through our board this year, and provisions related to the K-12 districts, and that's the points we want to talk about today. 2 key provisions that are currently in law are the development of district diversity plans and the appointment of hiring a DEI officer or team and advising school committees on DEI efforts. Next slide, please. Over the next few months, DESE will issue guidance for these requirements, including how districts can fulfill these requirements through existing plans and resources and existing staff. For example, how guiding districts, how they can incorporate their diversity plans into their SOA updates and developing training to support DEI officers or teams on updating their school committees on DEI efforts. We're committed to supporting districts with these requirements, and we will be in touch soon with guidance. Next slide. And my last update is that I want to remind you of key regulations related to the Protect Education Equity Act that were sent out for public comment in February, and will come back to the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education in June for a final vote to adopt. These regulations relate to interpretation and translation in schools. While districts are already required under state and federal law to provide interpretation and translation services to parents with limited English proficiency, the Act required the board to establish clear statewide standards for those services. The regulations, as proposed in February, and that went up for public comment, established tiered qualifications for interpretation and translation services with required competencies, skills, and training, provide a legacy provisions that allow for experienced staff who are currently serving in the role of either interpreter or translator to qualify via superintendent or executive director endorsement, allow for the use of machine translation, and provide time for districts and schools to come into compliance would not go into effect until September 2027. Again, these regulations, as updated by public comment, will come back to the board in June for final adoption. And if adopted, DESE is committed to continuing to provide guidance and training to support districts in coming into compliance. That was all for me, so I'll turn it back to you, Lauren.
Thank you, everyone.